acknowledge. Our Board of Education acknowledges that we are on the traditional territories of the Comox First Nation. We would like to thank them for the privilege of their living on their land and the gift of working with their children. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm going to take a moment before we move through the business to, though most of us know each other, to hear who is here, especially for our public listening. So grateful to see most of our partner groups in attendance. And if we can go around the table, beginning to my right.
Good evening, Jeremy, Superintendent.
Yes, hello. I'm Shannon Aldinger, School Trustee.
Susan Leslie, School Trustee.
Janice Caton, Trustee.
Kier Koski, President, KP Local 43.
Sean Holland, CDTA President.
Jacqueline Simmons, CDTA Vice President.
Jen Fisher, DPAC Vice Chair.
Megan Kelling, DPAC Secretary.
Lori Ball, VP for QP 439.
Sarah Jane Howe, School Trustee.
Carrie McVeigh, Secretary Treasurer.
Michelle Waite, School Trustee and Board Chairperson.
And I'm Chelsea McConnell-Keene, and I am a trustee and chairing our Committee of the Whole Open tonight. And we're here with many wonderful staff tonight, so thank you all for being here as well. I know we're going to be hearing from some of you very soon. We'll begin with item B, an adoption of our agenda this evening, and there is a motion before us.
Let the Board of Education of School District Number 71, Comox Valley, approve the May 13, 2025 Open Committee of the Whole agenda as presented.
Seconded by our board chairperson. For any discussion, the agenda. All those in favor? It's carried. We have one important item on our agenda this evening, which is always nice because we can give it our full attention and focus. So I'm going to look over, passing through all our other items, and I'll look to our I will look to our Secretary Treasurer, Carrie McVeigh, to introduce our presenters this evening.
Thank you. Yes, it's a privilege to introduce Jennifer Nelson, our Assistant Secretary Treasurer, and Candace Hilton, our Director of Finance, who will be presenting our budget this evening. Thank you.
Sorry. Just start presentation.
Thank you. So before I get started, I just wanted to take the opportunity to acknowledge our Director of Finance, Candace Hilton, who's here with me today, as well as Kathy Collins, our Manager of Budgets, who isn't here but has done a great deal of work to prepare the budget for us today. So thank you for all your hard work and pulling together this many weeks that go into getting to this point with the budget. So you will find a fulsome report in the agenda, as well as the presentation. There's copies attached behind the report that we're going to go through today. So those exact slides. And just wanting to mention before we get into the presentation that this is focused just on the operating budget, not the capital and special purpose funds today. And we're really just focusing on the differences, so any additions or adjustments that have been made since the amended budget that was previously approved in February. So just highlighting the board's strategic priorities here, we just wanted to note that as we're going through the budget process and identifying adjustments and items that need to be added to the budget, we are always keeping in mind the board's strategic priorities and ensuring that they are in alignment. And just highlighting for you here where we're at with the budget process. So we brought forward at the last board meeting an update on the ministry announcement. And so today we're providing to you the cost impacts as well as the other revenue impacts within that first look at the preliminary operating budget. We did just close a public survey that we're summarizing and bringing back feedback to you at the next board meeting as well. So as we're throughout the year, there are several conversations, budget conversations that take place throughout the year between leadership as well as with partners. And that involves setting priorities for the delivery of student learning, projecting student enrollment, reviewing cost pressures to maintain the current levels of programs and services, as well as projecting revenues, and looking at strategies and options to address the net budget position in alignment with the strategic plan. So student enrollment is the main primary factor determining how much revenue that we receive from the ministry for our operating grant. So the operating budget is based on 10,548 FTE for 25-26. This is based on the projections that were provided to the ministry in February. So we provide those projections for the upcoming year plus two years out. So this graph just highlights for you those projections as well as the 5 years of historical. And then just another more historical view of that graph, you can see of the past 10 years, we've experienced significant enrollment growth. And then we are projecting for it to slow and plateau in the upcoming 3 years. So the ministry grant is based on the 10,548 FTE. We're anticipating a budget of about $127 million based on that enrollment for the upcoming year. So not only does that include enrollment, but the ministry has also provided a 1.1% increase to the per pupil rate for calculating that revenue. And the intention is to cover past enrollment, past labor settlement funding, including the cost of living adjustments. So that's known as COLA, as well as includes teacher Pro D and previous improvements to the extended health benefits for support staff. So the net increase to the operating grant is about $2.9 million. So in addition to the operating grant, we also receive other revenues that are incorporated into the operating budget. So we have international student tuition fees are increasing $247,000. So the budget is still based on 195 FTE. However, tuition was increased to reflect inflation, as well as there's an increase to the homestay fees to families. So we're recognizing that additional revenue. And then you'll see further on, there is some additional costs associated with that as we make those payments out to the families. North Island District Education, or NIDES tuition, we received some additional revenues relating to tuition in the budget as well. And so we're anticipating a $40,000 increase for that. And then we also need to consider interest rate reductions. The Bank of Canada is projecting some interest rate reductions over the next while. And so we've incorporated a $90,000 reduction in revenues for that into the budget. And we've also incorporated an additional $32,000 reduction, which is related to some other revenues. There's some miscellaneous grants that have ended, or we've had to adjust other miscellaneous grants in the operating fund. And so that's about $32,000. So overall, the increase to projected revenues is $3.1 million. And here you can see that the operating grant continues to make up 96% of our revenue, so a significant portion, with only about 4% coming from our other tuitions and miscellaneous grants. So moving on to the expense side, or the cost pressures that we're anticipating. What we've tried to do on this slide is sort of break down some of those cost pressures into what is specifically related to enrollment changes and maintaining our current levels of service. And so here you can see we're increasing teacher staffing $1.24 million. And that is the result of enrollment changes as well as recognizing the continuous enrollment in online learning. So we're continually receiving enrollment throughout the year, and we have to recognize that we have to staff for that enrollment that's coming on. We're also increasing support staff by $129,000, and that is related to additional clerical time for administrative support in the online learning environment, as well as we have some additional space coming online this year due to renovations and modulars that we will have to ensure are cleaned. So custodial time is increasing. So the combination of that is $129,000. We're also seeing an increase of $190,000 related to services and supplies. So that is also related to enrollment changes. We have some increased with the school budgets, including the online budgets relating to enrollment. We've had to adjust those. And this next one, the existing staff salary and wage increases of $641,000. So we haven't included in this budget any increases for unionized employees because the contracts are currently under negotiation and bargaining. So the intention is that once the contracts have been ratified, we would then incorporate those costs into the budget and we would anticipate an additional grant coming from the ministry. So that would roll into our amended budget once we have those amounts. But at this point, we still have to consider the fact that teachers may increment on the pay scale. So depending on how many years they're employed, they move up the pay scale. So we have to acknowledge there is a cost impact with that. So we're increasing by $300,000 to accommodate that, as well as the exempt and PVP. Although we've not received any direction from BCPC to provide any increases, we still have to acknowledge that potential liability within our budget. If we do receive direction to proceed, we would anticipate we likely wouldn't receive additional funding. So we're noting that in the budget now. So the combination of those two cost pressures is $641,000. And then we're also increasing benefits by $617,000. So as we increase the teacher staffing, we have to acknowledge there's benefits associated as well. So we've increased there, as well as we have received our premiums for the upcoming year, and we're just seeing a lot of higher usage in the benefit programs, and so we have to increase our premiums in order to maintain the health of the program. So we've recognized that, and we're incorporating that now in the budget, and so that's a $617,000 impact. And then on the Indigenous Education or IEC funds, we're receiving some additional funds through the Ministry grant. Although we have to recognize that it's being spent strictly on Indigenous education as it's targeted funding. So we're just ensuring that the cost is also associated here. So some of the other cost pressures that we're seeing in the upcoming budget, we actually were able to find some savings in utilities. We've been monitoring that closely, and we feel comfortable recognizing $100,000 savings there. We're attributing that to many of the continuous optimization projects that have taken place in our facilities. So we're seeing the usage go down, as well as the carbon tax is being eliminated, so we're recognizing that we'll likely see some savings there. Ministry recoveries, so this is related to the insurance premiums for SPP and BCPC class fees. So the combination of those are going up about $9,000, and we don't have any control over that. We're told what we have to pay, and so we're acknowledging that here. We have an increase of about $10,000 relating to cybersecurity initiatives. So there's a need to redirect capacity towards cybersecurity. And so we've reviewed and we're able to redistribute some funding and supports into that area. So the net impact is $10,000. And then finally, the busing contract is up for renewal this year. So we've just recently gone out to RFP for that. We're just closing and reviewing that at this time. So we don't have a final contract to know exactly what we're looking at for next year, but we've incorporated an increase and contingency to ensure we have enough funds to support that once we've finalized it. So moving on to the last component here, and these are some recommended new priorities that staff have identified and we've incorporated. So secondary school department head implementation of $65,000. Indigenous engagement and knowledge specialist of $117,000. And this is currently in place, just being funded on a temporary basis through prior year surplus. So the recommendation is to move it into ongoing operating. And then increasing supply budget for schools. So the per FTE rate hasn't been adjusted in several years. And so we're recommending to give them a bit of a bump in their supply budgets to support them there. So that's $34,000. So overall, the projected expenses or increase in expenses for the 25-26 operating budget is $3.1 million. And I'll just touch on the local capital transfer on this slide of $10,000. We didn't create a specific slide for this, but it is noted in the report. Last year, we were able to defer the purchase of modulars, so we were able to eliminate the annual transfer to local capital by about $1 million. And so as we've reviewed local capital again this year, we're able to defer it again another year. The reason we were able to do that was there was an announcement for some capital projects that came online, so we were able to take advantage of that space coming available next year. So, however, we do feel that we need to increase by about $10,000 to support the ongoing maintenance and replacement for security cameras at schools. They haven't been properly funded in the budget to date, and we're starting to see some of them aging and needing more work. So just added $10,000 in there, so to the overall cost. So this graph just shows you overall where all the funds in the operating budget are being spent. You can see that 81% goes towards instruction, 12% towards operations and maintenance, 5% for district administration, and 2% for transportation. And this is same breakdown as we would have seen in the amended budget as well. There's been no change in how those funds have been distributed. And then just slicing it a different way, so you can see that 87% of our budget is made up of salaries and benefits, with 13% going towards services and supplies. And then just looking at our salaries and benefits, this graph just breaks it down a little bit further, so you can see by employee group where we're spending our wages. So 59% for teachers, 13% for support staff, 8% for PVP, or principals and vice principals, and then 9% for educational assistants, and 5% for substitutes or TOC, and then 6% for other professionals. So overall, at this point, we do have a balanced operating budget with no reliance on prior year surplus to balance the budget. So it is important to maintain an appropriate level of surplus, just to ensure that we can weather any uncertain events and continue to maintain our operations. So the board policy states that there should be a minimum of 1.5% of operating expenditures and a maximum of 3% to reserve as a contingency reserve for this purpose. And it currently sits at $3.1 million or 2.67%. And so the budget at this point would maintain that balance for the year. And then we're just highlighting where some of those additional cost items that we've noted in the budget align with strategic plan. So where we could directly identify, we've added that in here. So you can see we've identified $217,000 towards decolonizing and indigenizing, 1.3 million for flexible learning environments, and then 108,000 for safety. And then finally, just the next steps. So as I mentioned before, we're summarizing all of the feedback that we've received through the survey, and we'll bring that back to you at the next board meeting. We'll be updating this full report to include capital and special purpose funds so that it includes everything, and we'll bring that back on the 10th of June, and with any adjustments that are required, as well as the goal will be to have the approved annual budget bylaw adopted at the June 24th board meeting. So thank you for listening to me, and I will open it up for questions if you would like.
Yeah, certainly. So at this point, we definitely welcome trustees and partner group members present, or anybody online as well. So I'll look to Josh as well, and I'll navigate conversations and questions as they come forward. And I see Caitlin's hand.
Thank you. First of all, I want to say thank you, because unlike many other districts on the island, we are not facing a shortfall. We're not cutting. We are continuing on, I call it almost a status quo, and maintaining on that one there. So kudos to our staff for watching the dollars and making sure that we're not one of those districts that are cutting, which is very painful. Parks will probably come close to $2 million, so thank you again. I have two questions. One has to do with the forecasting of students, because at one time we were forecast to be higher in students, which also helps with our budgeting, our forecast, and we used to go just the burger numbers. So I'm wondering what has changed with our student forecast, because those numbers seem to be off a little bit. And I'm looking at our NIDES Navigate, and that school seems to be exploding with numbers, and our brick and mortar students seems to be decreased, like almost like minimal compared to that. So I'm wondering how that data is coming into the district as we move forward, because that does have an impact on our funding and where we move forward, and also staffing and that. So I'm just wondering, where are we getting those numbers from, and what are we adjusting them accordingly? So I'm not sure who asked that question to.
Sure, I think that certainly some questions can come direct, but if other staff also wants to respond to them. Too.
Yeah, I'm happy to open the conversation. Our student numbers, Berger is a tool, which is an enrollment projector. It's particularly helpful in grades that we haven't seen, so it helps us with kindergarten particularly. When we actually look at our MyEd data, which is students that are currently enrolled in our district, we see that the incoming kindergarten cohort is smaller than the outgoing grade 12 cohort. So we see a bubble right now, particularly 8 to 12. And as those younger grades move through, we're expecting our bricks and mortar to stabilize. We are seeing continued growth at NIDES. We saw a huge increase in NIDES enrollment, of course, during and just after the pandemic, and then dipped, and it continues to grow. The large increase in NIDES is local students. It's from all across the province, and I think it speaks to when we look at our design principles in the strategic plan around an increasing need for us to start looking at some more flexible structures that connect to the needs of our learners and our families in different ways than just the one way of a bricks and mortar. I anticipate that until we start adapting some more flexible programs at schools, that NIDES will continue to see a fairly significant increase. We're seeing lots of families looking for that flexibility and change. I know there were some other questions in there. Could you remind me of?
I guess the question is that the number of students in our district directly impacts our funding. And when our barriers and our projections are off, and we plan for X amount of students in September, and those students are not coming, then we're having those budget adjustments. And my wondering is, are we looking at other data? Because it seems the numbers that I've had in the past, these are not reflective of what we've had in the past, because our numbers are supposed to be growing higher numbers, and we're not. That's shifted. And I'm wondering, how are we managing that so that we're not going to come September, we're not going to be less students than we forecasted that has an impact on our budget. So that was my question. How are we ensuring that those numbers are accurate so that come September 30th, the numbers we're getting from the ministry reflect the budget that we're going to be presenting and what we're passing?
Yeah, thanks. And I think what we've done is our number projection is quite conservative. So it's quite safe, I think, in terms of actually getting to that enrollment projection. We're relying on our school principals in addition to all of those other software programs. We're really triangulating that. It is really important to acknowledge that a district that isn't growing does not have the capacity to adjust to inflationary pressures year by year. So our projection of modest growth may be helpful as we deal with changing costs. Right now, that is one of the reasons why we're in a position that's different than other districts that either have static or slightly declining enrollment. The inflationary pressures go up, the enrollment does not support any of those additional costs, and therefore cuts are needed to be made. So I think your question around student enrollment is really on in terms of recognizing that's how we get our revenue, and that if we don't see at least modest growth year by year, we're at a different conversation at this time of year where we're actually looking at having to reduce services in order to handle the inflationary pressures that are not yet funded formulaically by the province.
Next is our board chairperson, Michelle Waite.
Okay, so I'm going to start by saying I have 6 questions, but I'm only going to ask the first one and let everybody else have the opportunity to ask the questions as I go through mine one by one. But I'm starting with, it feels like the biggest question. And through the chair to whomever this fits to, nobody's going to make eye contact with me. There's often reference in a budget to current levels or status quo. And it's hard to know what they are. And so my curiosity is, could we be provided, possibly by our next meeting, with the FTE count of people as identified, say, in page 5 of our package, where it talks about instruction, and then it lists school-based teachers, education assistants, school administrators, like it lists it out, a listing of all of our various teams of this year and what is projected to be for next year by FTE, so that we can see what the current means, and then what it looks like anticipated for the next year, so that we can understand and maybe learn more about the contractual obligations and the pieces that are connected to our strategic plan and some of the alignment. And I don't know if anybody can give me an answer tonight, but I've been trying to figure out a way of how to visualize or understand the current, because I appreciate the information about what, like, what the possibility is of the draft for next year, but without understanding the current levels, I guess I don't know enough. And so I'm just asking, and maybe there's a better way, but I'm asking is it a possibility, could we explore that possibility, and is it a reasonable timeline?
That's a question for
Yeah.
Superintendent Moorhouse, perhaps.
I'll probably stretch it out to make it longer, but the short answer is just yes. So I think that that's a reasonable request to have ready for the May 27th meeting. It may, we may get some feedback around additional detail, but we certainly can have a report that shows where we're at right now in some of those areas and what the intended changes would be.
All right, from our district parent advisory, Megan?
Respectfully through the chair, could you give a little bit of expansion on what other professionals and the 6% is on page 36? It's like the one of the high ones. Oh, yeah, sorry.
No, certainly, I think probably to our Assistant Secretary Treasurer.
Yeah, so other professionals, and I'll let maybe Candace jump in if I miss anything, would be exempt staff. There's also some positions, so that do you want to maybe answer this one? Are you able to? Because,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, so other professionals would include our exempt and excluded staff. So some examples would be managers, manager of finance, manager of IT, myself included as a director. So all of our support staff in our business departments are included in support staff, not other professionals. Other professionals would include coordinators for our international student program, as well as Indigenous education.
Candace? Are there any further questions? Kiyoshi?
Yes. Respectfully through the chair. When positions aren't filled in our district for education workers, what happens as that money is budgeted every year from the ministry through, I think, FTEs, if I understand the process correctly? What happens to that money?
I feel like that's you.
Are you making, sorry, Kiyoshi, are you making reference to failure to fill?
To that piece, and then just when there isn't, for whatever reasons, positions aren't filled in that context, where does that money go from year to year?
So if we could take last year as an example, our surplus at the end of the year was a combination of positions that we weren't able to fill and I believe additional NIDES revenue. As a result, that becomes our surplus for the year. And if we decide to restrict some pieces of the surplus, then it will go into the following year for one time. Having said that, let's use days as an example. If we know as we're going throughout the year that that we do have a significant amount of failure to fills, and Sean, as our associate superintendent with his team, has some hot spots or areas where we need to add additional EA time, then we would do that. Is that?
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
Deepak?
Thank you. Through the chair, I, like Michelle, have about 6 questions, and I'll try to be a little bit concise. This is going to sound weird. If you wouldn't mind going back to your beginning slide of your presentation, it's I feel like this a calendar that we had up. Yeah, that's maybe the next slide. Okay. So I'm looking at, I see May 13th is today, and then we see May 27th is the shared public and partner feedback with the board. I'm assuming partner would be, DPAC, QP, CDTA. I'm looking on the website and it says there's May 15th to 16th is opportunity for further engagement with the partner groups. And then there was something I had saw on a calendar that there was that, and I can't remember, there's about 4 different pages here, that partner groups then would have an opportunity to present at the next board meeting. So I'm just providing, that's somewhere I will find it eventually. I'm just seeking some clarity. Thank you. I'm seeking from clarification on actually which of those three options it is. First, is my first question. And I don't know who can answer that.
I think we wanted to provide flexibility
Okay,
in
great.
terms of what that looks like. So we are more than happy to meet with partner groups or attend meetings. So I attended DPAC last May 6th.
Yeah, last week, last
Like,
Sunday, yeah.
Weeks confused. CUPE has requested that we have a meeting with them. We're attending IEC, so it could look like that. It could look like a presentation at a meeting like this, or just trying to provide flexibility to our partner groups in terms of what works for them instead of using a one size kind of all fits all.
Thank you for that clarification. I can pull on Michelle and let other people ask questions first, and then I'll circle back.
Trustee Aldinger is going to jump in.
I haven't counted my questions. Maybe more or fewer than that, but my sort of related to Chair Waits and sort of maybe a step beyond it. I think we've talked about before the fact that, well, I mean, we're talking about here, the significant portion of the budget that is allocated for staffing, and particularly staffing tied to our students. And some of that I know is, or at least in terms of educators, is, which this is probably tied more directed to the two of you, is tied to the collective agreement language around class size and composition. And so that to me would be non-discretionary, like that is set in stone. And I'm curious what kind of the balance is between numbers that are non-discretionary and numbers that are more discretionary. And I would think that the non-teacher piece is, there is more discretion. Mm-hmm. So I guess there's two parts to that. One is there a way of like finding out what number of the educators in our system are tied to that class size and composition piece, and versus ones that aren't. And then also, the breakdown of other roles in the district and almost how they're tied to the priorities that are being set, some of which are outlined in the strategic plan, and some are, based on individual needs of students with designations and the like.
Go ahead.
First, and then I can.
Sure. You'll clean up. Appreciate that. No, I think it's important, I think, in a budget presentation, whenever we acknowledge, 87% of the district's revenue within the operating grants go to staffing. But not 100% of that staffing is just in compliance with collective agreement language. There's lots of discretion and decision-making around where that staff is allocated. I think that it would likely, so that I don't get the numbers wrong, the numbers of discretionary staffing is, when I say discretionary, staffing with choice, whether it's a curriculum support teacher at the district level versus a classroom teacher, which we just simply need because there's students there. That would be, we potentially could have that information for the May 27th meeting with the FTE. I just want to make it clear, though, that the question around how 87% of the budget is spent is a really good question, because it's not all just A plus B equals C. There is some discretion and decision-making around some of those central positions. And quite frankly, all exempt staffing is not connected to any specific expectation or language that's rooted in the same way that it would be around class size and composition with teaching FT. So we can prepare that for the May 27th meeting.
Trustee Keaton.
Thank you. So one of the questions I had, because in the past I used to know it and see that when it comes to mental health counseling and some of the other programs and supports that we used to do, like we budget X amount for mental health support for supporting that, or sexual health, and that one, there was kind of a line item that we gave percentage, and we used to know that was meeting the criteria, what percentage of the budget was that, and I don't see that, and maybe I'm missing it. So I'm just wondering, in our budget, looking forward for the next year, are we meeting the needs with those supports for students? And if so, where is that and how do you determine the percentage on that one? That's the one question that because there used to be a line item for that and I don't see that. I'm wondering how that's reported out. And is it something that is flexible looking at challenging times? So exams for numbers, so we have $100,000 set aside for the mental health supports, but we've had a crisis year where we need more money into that. Is a flexibility in there to support that in those certain programs? And just how is that being managed and where is that in the system? I just like some clarification on that, please.
Yeah, why don't I speak briefly? I think part of the piece tonight is we're just looking at the operating budget. Quite a bit of our mental health targeted supports have come through mental health grants from the province over the last number of years. So that would be more in the special interest funds. I think that's a good question to ask. How are we using that funding? Which we can have a more fulsome answer at our May 27th meeting. I also just want to acknowledge that although our strategic plan also attempts through some of the ways in which we shape and shift education to address mental health through our level of expertise, which is classroom pedagogy. And I just want to remind us again of the role that we have as educators to ensure that while we recognize, child and youth mental health as a significant issue and probably an accurate reflection to some of the pressures and reality of our society in 2025, that part of our work is making sure that we're not actually adding to that through whether it be, we are acknowledging and honoring child and youth mental health by honoring the whole child as they come to us, by differentiating learning as required, by trying to create spaces like hallways and bathrooms where children are safe. And I think one of the pieces that would concern me is if some of the support we need for mental health is also as a result of how they're experiencing the hallways or navigating some of the complexities of being a student in our school. So I acknowledge the importance of the child, of mental health, and the fact that we do have some specific targeted pieces, but also the responsibility we have as an entire system to create spaces where it is more likely to encourage positive, where kids can flourish. And I think that's just a recognition that every room and every interaction is part of the mental health piece that we need to understand around how we can support our youth.
Go back to Trustee Waite.
Thank you. For adding that curiosity. I'm wondering, with my FTE ask, is it simple at that time to put a dollar value to connect to those FTEs? And it's just an ask if we were doing a comparator of FTE and dollar value, and I'm just going to float it there. It's not a question for this, but it is an ask. I have a curiosity about the departmental head line item in our secondary schools. Just wondering if somebody could share.
Yeah, I'm happy to share that. And then, unlike most the committee of the wholes, I might even ask if anybody else would like to add in what I miss, and that might be over to CDTA. But just in recognition, when our high schools are fairly large and complex entities, that I think part of when we look at the strategic plan, the design principles and the values that are embedded within it, that it is a beautiful opportunity for formalizing a distributed leadership model in our secondary schools. I think distributed leadership helps foster a positive team environment and encourages collaboration, not only in departments, but interdepartmentally. It allows for opportunities for consistency, coherence, but also innovation and lots of interdepartmental opportunities for growth. I think it is a significant opportunity to guide pedagogy in alignment to the district and to school goals. And so with the design principles in mind, I think that having department heads is an ideal way to really create space for conversations amongst colleagues on how to integrate and move our classrooms forward in a positive way. So it really just helps support shared goals, and it formalizes a distributed leadership model.
Would you like to speak to that before I go to our next speaker?
I can speak to that further. Department heads historically have been a piece of our high schools, but they were faced about 20 years ago with cost-cutting measures. One of the things that department heads provides, I mean, Jeremy touched on it, into that collaborative environment, but it's also a mentorship piece that it provides, especially new teachers, someone to turn to in their department who they can go to for advice, for support, and which is currently happening to a degree with that they do turn to one another, but it basically gives focus to an individual and recognizes a specific individual for that extra work that would be required for doing that, rather than what happens in some cases, new teachers either turning to an administrator, which, depending on the situation, can be supportive, but it's also revealing weakness to your employer, who in many cases, they're temporary teachers and don't want to reveal any weaknesses because they want to be hired again. So it creates a person of safety who they can turn to for that support. And again, having the title is probably almost as important as the financial stipend that goes with it. But financial stipend is more encouraging to have somebody step forward to do the role on top of the regular teaching, which is to be able to provide that mentorship, organize department meetings, and again, just to provide that, what Jeremy talked about, that idea of cohesion within the department, which I think has slowly been eroded from where it once had been when I started my career.
Going back to the 6-item list. So
Yeah, sorry, yeah, thank you. If I can, page 30 of your slide, I think it's, well, I don't know, I've lost the roll on pages. It's 30 on this, I'm not sure what it is. It's operating 2025, 2026 cost pressures, enrollment changes and current levels of service. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 outlines, triangles of different increases, and the third one down, increased services and supplies and enrollment / online learning was 190,000. I was just curious if you could dive into what that, like, be more specific on what that is. I understood the learning support you outlined, it was clerical support, janitorial support. Below that was an increase to teacher salaries and potential PVP. Also the benefit premiums, I understood that, but it was that 190 that I didn't quite understand what the details of that were. If you wouldn't mind outlining that, it would be great.
Yeah, so, oh, sorry.
Sorry, it's just the Interior Assistant Secretary Treasurer, Jennifer Orr, Director of Finance.
Yeah, so that includes, it also includes the increase of 117,000 for the international program as well. So that it's the 117.5 plus the 62,300 for the increased enrollment. So the for the online learning, we have to pay for supports. What are they called?
There's actually 2 different funds. So there's a student learning resource fund that's required. The online learning interim procedures guide states that we have to provide at least $600 per student. Those funds are used to pay for activities and other formal instructional components like, say, dance, music. It can also be used to pay for internet costs. The teachers for those programs are also receiving a program learning resource fund that is to be used for our students that are in blended programs and is to provide for the well-rounded learning experience for those students, so they have the ability to use those funds for field trips and other activities. In addition, the school formulas, schools do receive their budgets based on formulas. So even in brick and mortar, as enrollment has increased, they do see a slight bump up in those formulas because they're based on FTE. And I think that would be it for those ones, yeah.
The international program, the increase is largely related to the homestay. They increased the amount paid to families next year. So that makes up a good portion of that 190.
Thank you very much for that clarification. I appreciate it.
No issue with you.
Thanks. Respectfully through the chair. Will the $129,000 for additional, for the increase for clerical and custodians, will that be directed to making positions 40-hour work weeks and full-time work for our members?
Sure. Carrie?
No, it wouldn't be any increases that are different than this year, so it would be the same, generally speaking, the same number of hours. Except for maybe whereby a formula would say that a school is able to have additional admin assistant time, but not to actually increase staffing to 40 hours.
Can I do a follow-up question for clarity?
Sure.
Is that okay?
I'll allow it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And just so the perception, so I'm perceiving the information correctly in my mind here, is the increase based on higher workloads with higher enrollments in that context? So there's more work in the district for those positions based on the enrollment piece in that context? Is that what's driving the 129,000 to clerical and custodial?
If you're talking about that specific line, I could look at either Jennifer or Candace to be able to specifically indicate what the 129 is comprised of.
So the 129 is actually specific to both custodial and administrative support out at nights. Custodial support is being added because we have new space needs with the Aspen expansion, the prefabricated modulars and other modular needs in the district. So custodial time is anticipated to increase. As well, the enrollment and complexity of work at NIDES has grown exponentially, and they've had the same level of clerical staff for at least the last 6 years. So a decision was made to add some time to NIDES clerical and to combine it actually with a position that is also supporting the Indigenous online learners at that site. So it's really specific to 2 areas. And sorry, just for the question earlier about other professionals, I think a better way that I could have explained it would be it really is just for anyone that's excluded from a union contract. So it would also include not only directors and managers, it would include trustees as well as our superintendent, secretary, treasurer, and our associate superintendents. So just wanted to provide some further clarity on that.
I'm going to move on to Kyoshi's question because I didn't have a question about the custodial piece. I recall that in our amended budget, we approved $100,000 for supplies for custodial. And I'm curious with this $98,000 on page 19, how many FTE is that of PP custodial? And how many more spaces is it? How many more spaces are we looking at? So I'm thinking about the 11 seat expansion at last week. And then I was wondering if you have that information or if it's appropriate to ask that information of how many, is it a simple ask to say how many more spaces is that FTE, whatever it is, going to be?
Are you able to comment on?
I think what I might do, is, if it's okay, is ask our Director of Operations, Molly, just to speak to the additional space requirements for cleaning and the number of hours for custodial required.
So in that amount, it is factored in the expansion at Aspen, as well as the portables that have been added at Valley View and Cumberland. As far as additional space beyond next year, right now, there's nothing, that jumps off the page as unexpected. So we feel that that amount covers us for the addition at Aspen and the additional portables.
Back to Ben?
No, I think I'm okay for you now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, thank you. Go back to Michelle.
Said you might have a couple items.
Yeah.
Trustee Aldinger?
Yeah.
I'll start by circling back and saying thank you. I really appreciate, I'm sure we all do, the care and attention that goes into this, the work and the presentation today. I have a couple of questions about page 32 and the recommended new priorities. And since it's all on one page, I'm hoping I can ask two questions. My first is, I think that I heard you say, and I could be wrong, that these were recommendations from staff. And so one of my questions is, looks like the bottom line is that we'll have a balanced budget based on everything in here, but we haven't gotten the information from the survey yet or had a fulsome conversation around this table. And so if there are other new items that are approved over the next 2 months, would they come out, would the idea be that they come at the expense of these other ones that are listed, or what would we be looking at? So that, yeah, that's my first question about this page. And then one smaller question about this page too.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I mean, when you look at the sort of humble amount of proposal of $216,000, that brings us to a balanced budget. If when we have the entirety of all the recommendations, ultimately difficult decisions will need to be made. It won't necessarily just be here. It may be that there needs to be other conversations about other pieces when we look at some of the FTE that is discretionary. How are we investing that? So, but essentially, if we were to add anything of significance in terms of budget, it would need to come at the expense of one of either the recommendations or something that we're already currently, that already is currently in operating budget.
And if I may, one other question. In terms of the increased supply budget for schools, I'm curious whether the intention behind that is to reduce some of the kind of the almost the fundraising imperatives that PACs feel within schools. Like I'm not necessarily, again, looking more to our superintendent and secretary treasurer. Like that to me, I read that as the same types of supplies that PACs may be fundraising for, but maybe I'm wrong in that interpretation. And I know that's something that's come up in some of the school, the PAC meetings, the DPAC meetings, and other conversations about concerns around taxing parents' energy around fundraising for these types of things. Quite different for, you know, community building and events and things that help our kids.
I would be very happy if this small increase actually fundamentally shifted the reliance on some of the supplies that we receive generously from PAC and the fundraising efforts. The reality is that a $34,000 increase to all schools is likely not substantive enough. I think it's a small reflection of the fact that we all know, and we look at our own on a large district scale, the difficulty year by year of not being funded for inflationary pressures, and the reality is schools have fallen behind. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, it's a 5% increase to school-based budgets, just as a small recognition that they're buying less now in 2025 with the same dollars that they had in 2021. But while we're on the topic, I think that it is important, and I think the vision for our future, preferred future, is parents as true partners in the education of children versus fundraising. So, you know, I think one of the pieces we want to ensure is that the basic needs of students are met through the operating funds. It is our district's responsibility to ensure that there's enough paper and pencils and pens and books and resources, that we're not asking parents to supply the basic needs, educational needs, that are our responsibility as a district to be providing. We want to make sure that PAC do that work of fundraising, fundraises to make sure that a extracurricular event is supported, that a group is resourced, and those are the kinds of things that PAC funds should be used for. They should not be used to ensure that basic classroom needs are met for students. So, you know, I think I'm pretty passionate about that, and I think working with DPAC to best practice guide for how PACs should be utilized in terms of funds and what a good use of PAC funds could look like in a school, and making sure that we're meeting the basic needs of kids and not relying on our parent advisory. I think that piece around the A was for advisory. I didn't see, the parent fundraising group. It was a parent advisory. And so we really want to make sure that we're creating that agency. So.
Thank you. We had Sean from CDTA next.
I had a question about the $300,000 that were set aside for principals and vice principals. There was a comment that that is not going to be covered by BCPC, and I was wondering if that is because of current negotiations and that you don't know where the teacher increase is coming, or is that kind of slotted? Is it usual that that increase to principal and vice principal salaries is not covered? And
historically, it's only been the last 2 years that provincial funds have been designated for any exempt increases. Based on the financial realities of the province, we're anticipating that it's likely that they will return to being unfunded. So it's just to ensure that that liability is protected in the event that that is the case. If they are funded, then that would relinquish $300,000 back to the operating budget.
The 300,000 was actually in relation to teachers, correct?
There was two.
There were two,
teachers.
yeah.
To go over to Jen with Deepak and then come back to Michelle.
I have another question. Just to kind of tag on to what Shannon was saying, and I think I've interpreted, Jeremy, your answer, but correct me if I'm wrong. So of that $34,000, who will be spending that? So whose budget does that fall under? And I heard in your answer that it's just the principals, and it's the principal will get that little small budget increase. Is that correct?
It's a school budget through the principal.
To the principal. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
I'm sorry that you needed interpretation.
No, I just wanted to, I just wanted to make sure I was right. Okay, thank you.
Yes, I actually just basically don't want to ask myself a question, but I had a bit of a comment about FTE, which we're happy to bring back in May. And that is, of our entire number of employees that we have, we are going in the budget up by around 10 teachers from this year to next year. And that's, again, just based on this moderate enrollment amount of 71 students. I mean, quite possible we'll get to the amended and we will have more, but it's such a small amount of growth that we're experiencing that you will mostly find this in teacher staffing. So again, I think this year we're at around 660 in terms of teachers. Next year, around 670. We have around 215 EAs this year. So that's like already 885 staff. When you look at how many staff we actually employ, and I'm looking at Gwen for just like, what would be do you happen to know what the number right about now is for like total staff?
Not the total. Okay.
We can get that for you. I want to say somewhere around 1,900.
It was 1940 at the start of the year.
And then, so I just want to, so that's 885 of around 1,900. And then that's not including ISWs and TTOCs and our custodians and our admin assistants and operations. And many of these positions are based on either contract compliance or designated students or like ratios, formulas. So I just kind of setting the stage for the information that will come back to you. You won't see huge increases year over year just because of the year that we're in. The enrollment growth is not going to warrant it. And then if I may have one more point, we're talking about the priorities. I can't remember which, oh, they're on page 32. Just further to what our superintendent Morrow said, when we come back with this budget information from our consultation process, which by the way, we've had a huge response to, I think it's somewhere around 270 people have responded to it, so that's exciting. And to be determined in terms of analyzing and what that feedback tells us. And in addition to that feedback, our senior team has had an opportunity to sit down, and there are certainly other priorities that we would love to see in the system that are aligned with our strategic plan. So yeah, there will be some difficult decisions to be made in a year where we don't have a whole lot of money extra to spend. So there will be some difficult decisions. One of the ways some of you might want to think is sometimes we restrict, money within our budget. Again, that's how we did our Indigenous engagement and knowledge specialist before we embedded it into the operating budget. So that might be a way that we need to fund some priorities, not through the operating grant, but or budget, but actually taking a look at any surplus funds we can restrict.
I had Chair Waite and then Trustee Keaton.
I think this is a quick question, and it's about Indigenous education. And I'm going to start by saying I really support that we could prioritize the Indigenous engagement and knowledge specialist position. But my curiosity was on page 11, where it referenced the 3-year commitment to transfer $100,000. My memory is that we allocated $100,000 in our amendment budget. So if we do this for the 2025-26 year, then the following budget year would be the 3rd year. I just want confirmation that this would be year 2 of the $100,000. Correct.
Janice?
Just a question, and actually I think our Secretary Treasurer tweaked my ask on this one here. Part of our strategic plan in our budget alignment, and I remember the conversation is that senior leaders were going to look at some of the programs and things that are happening in the district, looking at some of the redundancy, the overlapping, and part of our budget process and part of bringing the next budget is looking as to what programs and what were redundant and what do we need to do that. And I'm just wondering, is that part of what we're doing now? So the budget, what's coming forward, we'll be looking at that. Is that, or have we started that, or is that something to look at next time? Because we talked about re-looking at some of the programs that are here for 25 years, but do they really meet the needs of the students? And I thought we talked about during the budget process was an opportunity to look at what was working, what wasn't working, and we had to make some really hard decisions. This is the rationale how we're doing that. So I'm just wondering, is that part of what's happening now, or is that something that's future and looking at those budget when you talk about hard decisions, having those difficult conversations?
I think that we're constantly looking at where we can create efficiencies, given that at the end of the day, our operating budget really is tight. I mean, as are all school districts. So I think that forward looking would be an opportunity to actually do a bit more of a deep dive into some program reviews, which would be more impacting I guess that would be the 26, 27.
I just want to add, I think one of the things that gets missed often when we start talking about budget is we don't do a great job. I don't think I do a great job of capturing all the conversations that I'm in throughout the year that are actually budget conversations, whether they are requests from a partner or recognizing shortages or hotspots within the district. So I do want to bring to the table that by the time we're getting to recommendations, it's not based solely on just a single point of contact or one conversation. That there's usually quite a number that are behind that. I think that conversation, as we really start to evaluate progress on the strategic plan, really invites the conversation of what are we doing and how effective is it. And I think that whenever that conversation is that we do, and I acknowledge that we do need to do some things different. in order to get different results. And I think that's part of the piece as we engage in what I think is going to be transformative work as we deeply investigate our programs through a lens of equity, through access, that it will invite and necessitate change. I think the difficult piece is that, and I love this, I've seen this on a slide where it's like, who wants change? And everybody's hand is up. And then the question is, who wants to change? And everybody's hand goes down. And I think the recognition is that whenever we change something, it means that there is somebody who has been doing some work that may no longer be meeting the needs in 2025, but it's a person who has put their heart and soul into that work. And so just being very aware of the impacts as we make those changes, it's people who are impacted in that process. And so the answer in short is we continue to review and we will continue to need to change, and that some of those changes are going to be difficult because it's going to invite us to either do different work or maybe to face that we need to change some positions fundamentally, and so that's part of the piece.
Looking back to Chair Waite, who says she has 3 more. So
I might ask a couple of them. I'm going to ask them all together.
Great.
You got it? I'm going to try. Benefit premiums. It's like, wow. Is there any consideration to exploring different carriers? Are we locked in other contractual agreements? Seems like a really high amount of money. My next question is about local capital. And I've actually tell by the attachment what the local capital dollar amount is for 2025-26. And just wondering what kind of rigor that goes through when we list like a $1,900 line item on page 19, but we have like a couple million, I think, for local capital, and how the decision gets made that feels separate than all of this. That's number 2. And the third is, I can't follow the money for nights. It looks like we have our anticipated increase of 40,000, and then we have support staff position increase $62,000 in supplies, but then where's the teaching component? How do we generate 40,000 in the nights increase, but then have a significant, what's happened in between with nights?
You want to know?
Like, what's the pathway? So those are my 3 totally separate questions. Okay.
Can I start?
1?
Well, I've got 3 and 1. So if
1.
you want to think about 2, I didn't even write 2 down because I don't know the answer. So which one? But I want to say one thing, and what I can't answer, and I believe that benefits are provincially determined who our carrier is. So I don't think we have that opportunity to change.
That's right.
But I do want to look at it from a different lens, which is we have seen a tremendous increase in benefits post-COVID. And I think that this is not a bad thing. It's a drain on the budget when we talk about the importance of wellness in a workplace. We want our employees accessing the benefits that they've earned through hard-fought contractual negotiations over time. And so there is a significant cost, but the good news is that our employees are accessing some of the services that actually support the profession that they've chosen, which is a draining, exhausting one. And so I'm grateful to see that increase. And so I recognize that it's growing at a rate that's really concerning. At the flip side is it would be more concerning if employees weren't accessing it. And so I'm really grateful that we have the funds for supporting that. 3, I just want to talk a little bit about NIDES. Part of the recognition over the last period of time has been that NIDES is in need of additional supports across the board. So we have added significantly to the teaching FTE to support not only the enrollment growth, but actually to change. We want to ensure that the services that we aspire to provide, which is still flexible and individualized, even in an online interface, requires us to start lowering the number of student contacts that teachers are responsible for in the online environment. And so there is a substantial interest and action towards a more sustainable model in meeting the needs of students at NIDES. And we've really moved away from words like revenue to learning environment and what is the best way to meet the needs of students in that online interface. So there is a significant contingency. That's why when we see over 10 FTE and over $1 million added to staffing with only 70 students, it's because we're actually addressing the substantial understaffing that's been over the last number of years at NIDES. So that's why the teaching increase is substantially more than 70 students would necessarily generate. It's to address a fundamental staffing issue there. Over to you for number 2.
I think, was that a question in response to what Jeremy just said?
Well, I was just going to add to the comment that he made about benefits, because I've asked this question in the past. And when it was answered to me a couple of years ago, that flipped my perspective on like the increase to that, which seems to happen. Like it's been increasing. But the way that I kind of like thought it was kind of nice that it was increasing, similar to what you said, but like a lot of our staff are parents, so their kids are being supported by the benefit increase too. So in like a roundabout way, we're like supporting students by having those benefits increase. So it's sort of like bumps for all staff and kids. So I just enjoyed that perspective when it was brought up, because I asked the same question as you like a few years ago, and somebody said that to me and it just stuck with me. So I just was sharing.
And for several, years now, a lot of increases in benefit plans are around mental health. And like Jeremy said, like that's something we want to ensure that we're supporting.
Before we go to number 2, Michelle, did you have something? Yeah, I was only that I didn't want anyone to misunderstand my question about that. I support employees using the resources
absolutely.
to ground themselves in the tools that they need. My curiosity is when our short-term and long-term disability percentages rise, also do those rates. And so sometimes I don't know why the rates are rising, or they just general across the board, and that might be a too much in the weeds question. but if they're rising because the cost of benefits are the positive supporting benefits are rising because people are using them more.
Thank you.
Then that's different than our team members going off work, and then carriers just being able to do what they want.
And sorry, I was going to say, like, great question around, like, when you're seeing premiums rise, the question obviously comes to mind in terms of whether or not we would go to market to see whether or not we can get more competitive rates. But we do belong to the BCPC buying group. And so we already have, to some extent, that buying power with other school districts. We also have our own organization of the plans. And I don't know if you would add anything to that, or.
I think I would just add that it's really specific to extended health and dental premiums as well as the group life. There has been increases in usage of short-term disability and long-term disability plans, but that is not the direct tie to the premium increases that we're seeing. It's more about the utilization of those benefits, mainly in extended health and dental. And I think as families too see their own budgets tightening up, they're really accessing every possibility of having expenses covered that they can. So I think premiums have been rising because of that, and mental health and other reasons. I also wanted to provide a little additional information on your question around the NIDES enrollment, because I think the one area where we identified the $40,000 might seem a little confusing because that money is really related to an other revenue. It's not provided by the Ministry of Education. It's actually generated through international tuitions that NIDES generates, so international students that are taking courses. If you look on page 17, that will show the differences in the revenue to be generated through our online learning program. And you'll see that in September for online learning, there is approximately an increase of 492,000. And then we have counts in both February and May that are also anticipated to increase. So overall, that increase is about 2.3 million in comparison to our prior budget.
I will ask Michelle quickly if you could refresh us on item 2, then have Secretary Treasurer Carrie McVeigh address it, and then I have Sean next on our speaker.
It was regarding the local capital.
Thank you.
And how much is it? Because I had a doing so well. I have a page 18. I'm actually trying to figure out what the total is for the upcoming year. And then again, what is that for determining that versus other line items on the subsequent?
Like in terms of like projects or?
Well, yeah, like what is the total for, this is the local capital reserve forecast. So is this an indicator of what we are using to our budget? Because I don't see that, I can't find, it must be here somewhere.
The transfer that we do out of
Yeah.
operating? Yes. So you can see, sorry, I know it really is small writing or printing. Page 18. At the very top, there's annual local capital transfer. So every year we do a transfer from operating to local capital. And I don't know that it's increased significantly or if at all over the last number of years, but I'm just looking to ask that question.
Yeah, so on page 18 of your agenda, you'll see that that summary. So in the red on the very top row, you can see the 1.47 million. That is the total amount that we would transfer out of operating towards local capital into the reserve this year, and it's $10,000 more than last year to reflect the increase to the security cameras that I mentioned. So if you look on that spreadsheet, along each column identifies how that is spent throughout the year. So we have 150 going towards fleet replenishment, copiers and printers, 70,000. We have $1 million going towards technology. And all of those line items across there are the same as last year, except for adding the $10,000. And so we do actually do quite a bit of work around coming up with that, making sure that it's adequate each year. So we have our Director of Information Technology does an 8-year capital plan just specifically for technology. So we sit down and make sure that he's going to have enough funds to address the IT needs throughout the district. And so as we're preparing this 5-year plan, we're looking out and making sure that we're incorporating that planning that's going behind the scenes. Similarly with the modulars, our Director of Operations and myself, after receiving enrollment projections, are looking at space and in terms of where we might need to purchase modulars or move empty modulars and what the costs would be associated with that. And we're looking 5 years out to make sure that if we're recommending not to contribute funds towards that this year, we're going to have enough for future years. So yeah, so that if you notice on that modular line item there, we are not contributing towards that this year, but anticipating that in future years we'll likely have to reinstate some funds potentially, but we would again revisit this several times throughout the year before making any recommendations through the annual budget process.
To Sean with CDTA.
I just wanted to follow up about the issue around the increased expenses for benefits. that I've heard from other locals who have reported out that they're having to make cuts in other districts to what's being offered because of having to meet those expenses. It's certainly not unique to here, other than we have the funds to be able to cover that, unlike some other districts that are instead having to cut various programming because of having to meet that. And the questions are being asked of, why isn't this being covered by the government since this is a contractual obligation?
Anything you need to speak to this matter? We're good? Oh, yes, Yoshi, good to you.
Respectfully through the chair, what is for the contracted out transportation service in this district? The 148,566 is an increase of the contract, I assume, and would like to know what the total cost is, and if our district has done a cost benefit analysis on whether bringing it back in-house is financially more feasible than the contracted out cost.
I know that our contract for busing services is up for renewal. We're in the process of doing that right now. We expect it to increase. I could ask our Director of Operations if you, off the top of your head, know what the total cost is.
Yeah, President, presently we have budgeted about 2.9 million in annual transportation costs. So the increase that you see projecting as estimated into the following year is an inflation of about 5%. But we'll have to review the bids once we receive them. As far as the cost of the contract, the school district has looked into what it would be to acquire like the land for a bus depot as well as the buses. However, that hasn't been, recently executed upon. But the cost of the actual land itself and buses would well exceed our annual contract value.
We have 3 minutes remaining, so following Janice, I
I'll
will.
follow up to Hiroshi's. Our district has never had in-house bus service. Our district is always contracted out. Mrs. Watson and Ash before that when we've never had an in-house bus contract ever. We've done just for the bigger ones. It's always been maybe the individual school district, like the minibuses, but we've always contracted out for over about 35, 40 years. We've never had an in-house bus service system. We've never had that here.
Okay, can I just ask a clarification question?
Sure.
Bus drivers used to be part of QP, so out of curiosity, my assumption is that came along with the buses, so maybe I'm missing something.
I personally don't feel like I can answer that question like that historical knowledge. Molly, do you happen to know if many years ago?
Yeah, to my knowledge, we've never provided in-house busing. We do have volunteer drivers for our activity buses that are either staff or parents, and they do transport kids. But as far as the district owning like a yellow school bus, I have no record of that ever happening.
Trustee Waite or Chair Waite is going to respond as well.
So my memory with my hats on is that the bus drivers were organized and became QP. And then so there was a time where our contracted bus service had unionized workers driving their buses. And then the members of that union decided they no longer wanted to be union members.
Okay. Put a question of clarification. Yeah. Maybe I'm totally missing something because they are still in our collective agreement as language, which means that language is held with the district in terms of our members. So maybe I'm missing something. Bus drivers were part of this district to our collective agreement with SD 71, and buses were a separate piece that was attached to the bus drivers?
If I can, I think maybe that is, if we wanted to have a deep dive conversation outside of this meeting with regards to that. But there are many things that are in our collective agreements that haven't been updated over time. And usually it's because you have only so much time during a collective bargaining process to, complete and ratify. And unfortunately, some of those housekeeping items don't get done. So that would be based on what I'm hearing from Molly and Chair Waite, would probably be the likely explanation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to look quickly to our Director of IT, unless there's anything online, which is smiling and shaking his head. So I just wanted to say, first of all, publicly, grateful for this evening, for everyone's engagement, but also really grateful for the wealth of responses that we've received in our survey responses. So thank you. I really look forward to May 27th when that input and feedback will be shared with the board, and there will be a public questioning period. And I just wanted to take a moment to extend our gratitude to Assistant Secretary Treasurer Jennifer Nelson and Director of Candace Hilton for their work and presentation tonight. And finally, thank you. We really value your time and relationships, and may we call for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Trustee Howe and seconded by Chair Waite. Thanks.